Hello, I'm Carl, one of the developers working on Vu. Today I'll show you how to write and compile your own nodes for use in Vu. In this tutorial, I'll cover setting up a development environment, compiling example node projects, and the basics of writing a custom node. To develop nodes for Vu, you'll need a few software packages and programs, namely Xcode, Xcode command line tools, Qt Creator, Qt Framework, and of course the Vu SDK. Xcode is available for download in the App Store or by going to the Apple developer website, which is developer.apple.com. Once you've downloaded Xcode and installed it, make sure you've opened it at least once and accept the developer agreement. Next, install Xcode command line tools. This sets your system up with things like header files, frameworks, and various other utilities that are used when compiling Vu nodes. The easiest way to install Xcode command line tools is through the terminal, which I open here using Spotlight. In the terminal, write xcode-select space --install, then hit enter. This will open a new window and download command line tools. Once the download is finished, you can verify that it has been correctly installed by typing in the terminal xcode-select space -print path with a hyphen between print and path. This should print the path of the location on your computer that command line is installed to. Lastly, install the Vu SDK. You can find it in the Releases section of the Vu website. The Vu SDK contains frameworks and utilities necessary for compiling your own nodes. You can place the Vu SDK folder anywhere you'd like. I put mine in a folder named Developer in the home directory. Okay, the next step is to compile one of the example nodes. This makes sure your development environment is correctly configured, making troubleshooting easier down the road. In the Vu SDK folder, there are two folders, Example and Framework. Framework contains the files necessary to compile your nodes, and the Example folder provides some templates to work from. Open Examples node stateless and double-click the example.stateless.pro file. Qt Creator should open, and you'll be asked to configure the project. The desktop configuration is good. Click Configure Project. Qt should take a moment to parse the project, then show the .pro and source files in the file browser. The next step is to turn off the shadow build in the build settings. On the left side of Qt Creator, open the Projects tab. Under General, uncheck Shadow Build. The project is now ready to compile. Click the hammer icon in the bottom left of Qt Creator or use the shortcut Command B. If Vu is open when you compile, it will need to be relaunched before you can see the new nodes in Vu. Once you've quit and relaunched Vu, search for VuOIs in the node library. This is the node you just compiled. If you see compile errors, check the transcript accompanying this video for troubleshooting tips. Now that your development environment is set up and compiling nodes successfully, you can start writing your own nodes. To quote the documentation, a node is like a function or method. It takes some input, processes it, and produces some output. Vu nodes are written in C, with a little bit of JSON to provide information to the Vu editor. At its most basic, a node must contain at least two things: a metadata entry, which is a JSON string with keys for node title, keywords, and the node version, and a node event function, which receives and sends data. There are two broad categories of nodes, stateless and stateful. A stateless node contains inputs and outputs and modifies data, but does not store any information. A stateful node has inputs, outputs, modifies data, but can remember information between events. For example, the countWithinRange node stores an internal variable with the current count, making it a stateful node. The easiest way to get started writing a custom node is to simply duplicate one of the existing example projects. Select the stateless folder, then hit Command D to duplicate it. Rename the duplicate folder Tutorial. I'll be recreating an existing node, Make Color Image. This node accepts a color, width, and height, and outputs an image flood-filled with that color, with the dimensions specified. This will introduce some of the different types Vu uses, as well as explain how to use the Vu API documentation. In the tutorial folder, rename the folder and project files tutorial.image.pro and tutorial.image.color.c. Open Qt, configure the project, and turn off Shadow Build. At this point, you'll notice the project pane isn't displaying the node source files. That's because the project file is still pointing to the VuOI's node file. Open the Pro file and change the line under Node Sources to tutorial.image.color.c. Once the project loads the source file, open it and swap out test.vuois for the tutorial.color name. Make sure you get the comments and metadata title. In the description, I'm a little brief. However, when you're writing your own nodes, make sure your descriptions are complete, as they will be the main source of documentation for your node in the editor. In the node event function, modify input data. Vuo input data and Vuo output data equate to input and output ports respectively in Vuo. For this node, 2 integers and a color are the inputs, and an image is the output. It's important to use only Vuo-defined types in these ports, so an integer wouldn't work. You'll need to use Vuo integer instead. For a float type, you could use Vuo real. You can find a full list of defined types on the API reference page. The new node event function should have 3 Vuo input data entries, one for width and one for height, both of the Vuo integer type, and one Vuo input data entry of the type Vuo color for the image color. There should also be a single Vuo output data entry of the type Vuo image, which is the output image. In the body of the node event method, remove the current contents. Then add the following line: asterisk output image equals Vuo image make color image, color, width, height. Vuo image make color image accepts a color, width, and height as parameters and returns a Vuo image, which I assign to the value of output image. Output image is a pointer to data, so I dereference it with an asterisk to assign a value. I found the make color image by checking the API reference and looking at the documentation for Vuo image. As a rule, constructors of Vuo types will always contain the word make. Constructors are used to create new instances of Vuo types. Once you've filled the body of the node event function, you're ready to compile. Like last time, either click the hammer icon or use the Command B shortcut. Open Vuo and search for tutorial.image in the node library. If you don't see your node, check the accompanying text tutorial for troubleshooting tips. Well done! You've successfully made it through the hard part. At this point, you have a development environment primed for building Vuo nodes, and all the knowledge necessary for exploring your own node ideas. If you run into troubles through this tutorial that aren't covered by the video or the companion text guide, stop by the VuoQA board at vuo.org, and be sure to check out api.vuo.org for further reading.